Good evening and welcome to the Hamilton Dinner. I'm pleased to report that we've raised $2.9 million tonight. It's actually 2.86, but I rounded up. And I'm delighted that this money has been raised among 500,000 donors whose maximum donation was $3 each. No. Actually, I'm very grateful to tonight's donors for their generosity and steadfastness at this moment of urgency and danger regarding the preservation of freedom and prosperity. A special thanks to our Platinum Patron level sponsors who have made this evening such a success. Cliff and Laurel Asness, Ravenel Curry. Please hold your applause till the end, please. Thank you. Ravenel Curry, Michael and Marilyn Fedak, Ken Griffin, Mark and Anla Cheng Kingdon, Dan Loeb. I'd also like to thank our dinner patron level sponsors, Tim and Julie Dalton, the O'Neill Family Foundation, Paula and Tom McInerney, Donna and Marvin Schwartz, Tom and Diane Smith. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of MI's supporters and to our dedicated team at the Institute who made this event possible. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you. Our honorees this evening need no introduction, but given their achievements, they certainly deserve one. Larry Mohn has helped to steer the Manhattan Institute over 3 decades, including 24 years as president. To quote the Wall Street Journal editorial board's coverage of Larry's retirement announcement, quote, "When the Manhattan Institute was founded in 1977, the image of New York was right out of Charles Bronson's Death Wish. Crime was out of control amid broader public disorder and economic decline. The city has undergone a renaissance, due in no small part to the ideas generated by the Manhattan Institute. The mayors who pulled this off, Ed Koch, Rudy Giuliani, Mike Bloomberg, could not have done so without the intellectual ammunition provided by MI. Mr. Giuliani once put it this way: if there was a charge of plagiarism for political programs, I'd probably be in a lot of trouble because I think we plagiarized most of them, if not all of them, from the pages of City Journal and from the thinking and analysis of the Manhattan Institute," end quote. If the scholars of the Manhattan Institute supplied the intellectual ammunition, Larry's contribution was to preside over and direct the arsenal of New York's urban renewal. If not for his leadership, his insight, and his hard work, New York City might have taken a very different path. Bill Bratton will formally introduce Larry this evening. I hear he's tough on crime, so I certainly don't want to be accused of stealing any of his material. But as chairman of the Institute and on behalf of the Board of Trustees and all of those that have had the honor of working with you these past years, Larry, thank you. Our second honoree, Secretary Betsy DeVos, has been a long-standing supporter and activist in the educational reform movement, and her generosity and vision continue to be pillars of our most important institutions. As Secretary of Education, she has championed school choice and the charter school movement, pursued important reforms to the antiquated student loan system, worked to remedy some of the worst abuses of the due process emanating from the Obama administration's Title IX guidance, and is leading the charge to restore free speech, open inquiry, and accountability to a system of higher education that frequently seems quite literally to have lost its mind. I'll leave the formal introduction to Chairman Emeritus Roger Hertog, but let's first welcome her with very deserved round of applause. Tonight's dinner comes at a very unusual moment for our country, for the conservative movement, for New York, and for the Manhattan Institute. We're experiencing a period of substantial economic growth on the heels of a long bull market, strong job numbers, and an improving regulatory environment. And yet, despite all this, socialism is on the march again. Well, they call it socialism, but it's more accurately described as left-wing statism, lubricated by showers of free stuff promised by politicians who believe that money comes from a printing press rather than the productive efforts of business people and workers. This ideology is spouted by people who are sometimes called snowflakes, but who are really thugs whose rigid orthodoxy rivals anything in Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution with its little red book. According to polls, a majority of young people prefer this foul mixture to capitalism. The grassroots of the progressive movement demand it at the ballot box, and the newest and oldest members of the Democratic Party beat the drum from within the halls of Congress and out on the campaign trail, respectively. The so-called Green New Deal, the latest progressive attempt to engineer our way of life and vest power in the administrative state, is now the standard of nearly every Democratic candidate for president. MI senior fellow Brian Riedel has actually calculated what the new socialist agenda would cost, from Medicare for all to universal free college and everything in between. $42 trillion with a T, trillion dollars over 10 years, or $218 trillion over 30 years. Setting out to sell this utopia to America, to the American people, isn't merely irresponsible political rhetoric. It is outright deceit. The crowning promise of this deceit is that if the climate does not cease changing within 12 years, utter catastrophe will ensue. Our response? Cancel the bar mitzvah. In blue states around the country, our cities, the engines of our economy and the centers of our civic life, are facing a series of challenges, some approaching full-blown crises. Crumbling infrastructure, overtaxation, overregulation, weak growth, unsustainable costs of living, rising homelessness, failing public education systems, runaway budget and pension deficits, and political corruption. These are diminishing the quality of urban life across America and chipping away at the very progress that the Manhattan Institute has been so instrumental in delivering at home here in New York. The late great novelist Tom Wolfe described City Journal as the great fool killer in the arena of policy. He was right, and today we find ourselves in a target-rich environment. This is the reason we're here tonight, and why your continued support for this institute and these scholars leading the fight to keep our society solvent, secure, and sane is so important. Tonight, we celebrate the ongoing leadership of Secretary DeVos, the outgoing leadership of Larry Moon, but also the incoming leadership of our new president, Reihan Salam. The son of immigrants who achieved their own American dream, a lifelong New Yorker and Brooklynite who knows what it means to take the subway to work each day, a compelling communicator across lines of ideological difference, a magnet for attracting and cultivating young talent, and one of America's most passionate, principled, dynamic, and creative policy minds. I speak on behalf of the Board of Trustees when I say that we couldn't be more excited by Raihan's vision for MI's future, nor any more confident in his ability to deliver that vision. We are, at our core, an urban policy think tank positioned in a city and state run by progressive Democrats, or perhaps more accurately, a bunch of commies. Our cities set the cultural and intellectual direction of our country. And if we are to succeed, our task requires more than just arresting the trend of liberal-led urban decline. We must reverse it. Under Raihan's leadership, MI will double down on that task, making the case anew for a quality of life conservatism in our cities and states. This will entail, among other priorities, countering the war against excellence in education, stressing the importance of public order, calling out public and union corruption, and highlighting the essential relationship between private sector growth and the flourishing of urban life. Of course, this isn't a new direction for the Institute. Our scholars have undertaken excellent and impactful work on these areas and issues for many years. But more than ever, it is to the broad fate of city and state governance in New York and throughout our union that our work will be dedicated. For as our cities go, so too goes America. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Manhattan Institute's incoming president, Raihan Salam.
Thank you, Paul, for your kind introduction. And thanks to all of you assembled here tonight for your generous support of the Manhattan Institute. Though I am still new to MI, its work has long played a central role in my life. When my parents first settled in Brooklyn in the mid-1970s, the city was in the midst of a long, slow slide. Growing up, most of our friends and neighbors moved to the suburbs as soon as they possibly could, and it was hard to blame them. In those days, muggings were so routine that battle-hardened New Yorkers treated them as inevitable, and I was one of them. I still remember the night 20 years ago when I thought I might have taken my last breath. I was returning home after a night out with friends, and just as I was about to reach my front door, someone rushed me from behind and held a knife to my throat. Not for the first time in my life, I was being mugged. All I had on me was a paperback book, which I had borrowed from the library, and $11. Two thoughts rushed through my head. The first, of course, was whether this guy would kill me. The second was whether I'd get in trouble for not returning my library book. I handed everything over, and then I rushed inside, where I woke my parents. When I saw the look of fear and disappointment in their faces, I knew that this couldn't be the end of the story. I called the police, who arrived on the scene within minutes. I rode with them in their squad car in the hope we might catch a glimpse of my assailant. We did not. But knowing that the police had my back made a deep impression on me, and also on my family. We realized we were not alone. We were part of something larger than ourselves. Millions of New Yorkers like us were through with being victims. And with the leadership of a reform-minded mayor and the best police department in the world, we took our city back. With each passing year, the streets grew safer. Private sector job growth started to soar. This city, our city, once again became a city of hope. Instead of fleeing New York in droves, hard-working, ambitious people from around the country and around the world did everything they could to join in its rising prosperity. It was during this age of reform that I started to question my inherited loyalty to the political left. Having lived through such a dramatic turnaround in the fortunes of my hometown, I wanted to know more about how it had happened and where the ideas that inspired Rudy Giuliani, Bill Bratton, and many other brave and decent public servants had come from. It was then that I first learned about the work of the Manhattan Institute, which quickly became my intellectual lodestar. Without MI and the leadership of Larry Moon, New York City's transformation would never have been possible. The success of MI's ideas in New York and in cities across the country is what most think tanks and politicians can only dream about. MI's vision has always been one of reform. It is not zero-sum. Everyone can climb the ladder of opportunity. Your prosperity does not come at the expense of mine. The role of government, as Alexander Hamilton argued long ago, is to protect the life and property of individuals and to ensure that public services actually serve the public. It is a vision that sees taxes as a necessary evil that must be spent carefully, wisely, and efficiently, not as an instrument for the enrichment of the politically connected, a case made tirelessly by Steve Malanga and other MI scholars. Most of all, the politics of reform is a unifying politics that treats every citizen, regardless of race, color, or creed, as a rights-bearing individual worthy of dignity and respect, a commitment that animates the work of Heather McDonald and Jason Riley and that inspires us all. In the past year alone, MI's Brian Riedel has offered a realistic roadmap for fiscal sanity at the federal level. Chris Pope has helped create a freer market in health insurance that could ultimately offer millions of Americans affordable coverage. Mark Mills and Orrin Cass have championed policies that can boost wages for the working class. And Stephen Ide has pointed America's cities towards a more humane and sane way to deal with the homelessness crisis our so-called leaders have allowed to grow out of control. This is what reform looks like. Yet the forces of reform, as those of us in this room understand all too well, are embattled. Arrayed against us is a poisonous politics of envy, a political vision that pits rich against poor, ethnic group against ethnic group, and promotes runaway socialism and such follies as the Green New Deal, all in the service of expanding an already bloated and self-serving public sector machine. To see the damage the partisans of envy are doing, look no further than the rank cynicism of the many local politicians who have been crusading against New York City's specialized high schools. Their complaint is that the schools are admitting too many Asian Americans and not enough Hispanic and African Americans. But as Ray DeMonico, MI's Director of Education Policy, and a man who has forgotten more about public education in this city than our mayor will ever know, has observed, what you will find is that virtually all of the politicians who've made this their cause also oppose allowing high-performing charter schools to give children of all colors the education they deserve. And how does that make any sense? If the goal really were to better educate all of our young people, there is no question that we'd embrace the charter sector. But instead, our elected officials choose to bash Stuyvesant and Bronx Science as though their students were somehow to blame. What explains this madness? It's simple, really. At the very same time New York City's mayor has been going after the specialized high schools, he was forced to abandon his so-called Renewal Schools program, which spent a staggering $750 million with nothing to show for it. If you were Mayor de Blasio, which story would you rather have dominate the headlines? A story of flagrant waste and mismanagement in which $750 million in taxpayer money was essentially set on fire? Money that could have helped literally tens of thousands of students attend charter schools with long wait lists. Or would you rather have reporters cover a faux social justice crusade in which radical leftists compare specialized high schools that have served thousands of working class and immigrant kids, including me, to the worst excesses of the Jim Crow South? I'm sorry to say that the poisonous politics of envy is not limited to New York. We're seeing it spread in cities from coast to coast, and now we're hearing a noxious new socialism reverberate in the halls of Congress. The politics of envy denounces private sector wealth creation as somehow suspect. It treats taxes as a punitive measure more than as a means of raising revenue. And it promises to hand ever more power to technocrats and central planners. More insulting still, this message is wrapped up in a language of racial justice that rings hollow to the children of every race and ethnicity left attending substandard schools, the women and men of every race and ethnicity left jobless, and the city dwellers of every race and ethnicity left to contend with poverty and disorder. That is why, under my leadership, MI will offer all those who rightly see the politics of envy as a dead end an alternative. They will promise you the world and leave you overtaxed, underemployed, and burdened by a broken government. We will champion a limited, effective government that will relentlessly focus on improving your quality of life, no matter what you look like, no matter where you come from, no matter whom you love. If America is to thrive in the decades to come, we must rally the forces of reform to vanquish the forces of envy. This is the battle that Betsy DeVos and Larry Moon have taken on in their years of service. And that is the one MI will continue to fight in the future. MI's ideas rescued my city from the forces of crime and disorder once, and now it is called upon to rescue cities across the country from the new forces that threaten to divide us and to tear us down. Thank you.
Good evening. On February 7th, 2017, a shot was fired across the bow of the Democrats in Congress and the public education cartel. That's when the Senate confirmed the nomination of the 11th Secretary of Education, Elizabeth DeVos. Her nomination process was, to put it mildly, shameful. Secretary DeVos was vilified and treated with incredible disrespect, subjected to embarrassing and irrelevant questions beyond the realm of anything to do with education. Betsy responded with intrepid integrity, disarming grace, and I should add, you will see in a couple of moments, a beautiful smile. I think we all would have understood if she had said, maybe I've caused too much trouble for everyone here, and maybe the president should nominate someone else. But that's not Betsy DeVos. A friend said of her, if you could choose just one word to describe Betsy, it would be kind. There's kindness in her eyes. There's kindness in her words, in her heart, and in her actions. But I would add, kindness doesn't take you to the end zone. You need to have a deep moral courage and resolve. And Betsy has that in spades. What her antagonists never understood was that she has heeded her entire life the biblical calling to service. To whom much is given, much is required. Perhaps that's why so much of her life has been dedicated to helping young people lift themselves by getting the best possible education, no matter who they are or what zip code they live in. The fact is that Betsy's entire life, without knowing it, has led to this moment and to this job. And she doesn't want to waste any time getting on with it. And you'll see she hasn't. Think of the important, and I would say monumental successes the Department of Education under Betsy DeVos has achieved in just a little over a couple of years. I'm afraid to say this, but I'm hoping she has 6 more years. First, she rescinded the Obama administration's morally flawed Title IX guidance. Amazingly, on how colleges and universities were required to adjudicate accusations of sexual assault. Her actions provided the same constitutional rights to both the accuser and the accused. For that alone, she deserves. She announced that the department will stop enforcing federal law that bars religious organizations from contracting with private schools and for tutoring and professional development, thus upholding religious freedom in accord with the Supreme Court's decision in 2017. Another enormous statement on her part. She advanced parents' rights by broadening 529 savings plans so they could be used to cover children's needs beyond paying for tuition. And ultimately, and maybe most consequentially, she proposed, although not yet congressionally approved, a groundbreaking proposal permitting federal funds to go to parents who want to send their children to private schools. And I would include sectarian schools as well. The proposal would truly be transformative. It would change public education for the better by creating more choice and more competition. With these unprecedented actions, it is now easier, more understandable, why the forces of the left and the powers that be in the educational establishment were so intimidated by her nomination. She came to this position as a calling, fully prepared to implement the most fundamental change in the Department of Education's history for the benefit of America's children. And she is well on her way to becoming the most consequential secretary in the history of the Department of Education. So please, let us stand as one and recognize the 2019 Alexander Hamilton Award winner, Betsy DeVos. Show him that smile.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all very much. And Roger, thank you for that overly kind introduction. I'm very grateful for President Bush's kind words as well. I'm really thankful also to be joined tonight by my husband, Dick, and by one of my daughters, Andrea, and her husband, Michael, by my mom, Elsa, and her husband, Ren, my sister, Eileen, her proper name, really Scoob to me, and Denny, my brother-in-law. Thank you all for coming tonight. Let me start by thanking the Manhattan Institute for this award. Although I must admit, I'm not sure what I've done to deserve such an honor. America's students do great things every day. All I've done is work to give them the freedom to do them. That shouldn't make someone stand out. But that it does says a lot about the state of affairs in education. I'm deeply honored to share this evening with Lawrence Mohn. It's nearly impossible to think about the Manhattan Institute without also thinking of Lawrence. During his time as president, he's made the Institute into a think tank that works, a reputation of intellectual force applied to real people, not just white papers. And when it comes to education, a subject I tend to think a lot about, the Manhattan Institute was in at the ground floor of the reform movement. And your stellar work continues today, thanks to people like Max Eden. Max, where are you? There you are. Max, thank you. Your important insights and dependable pressure on government to right what it has wronged exemplify the thoughtfulness and practicality we've all come to expect from this institute. When I think of this award's namesake, I can't help but think of Broadway's take on one of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. Should I have sung that? Don't worry, I won't try it. But with or without music, Alexander Hamilton's commitment to our country and our prosperity was unmatched. He noted that our young republic is about more than independence. America is an idea. It's the revolutionary notion that our rights are not bestowed by man, not a king, not a bureaucrat, nor anyone else. Our rights are God-given, and they're innately ours. The sacred rights of mankind are not to be rummaged for among old parchments or musty records, Hamilton wrote. They are written, as with a sunbeam, in the whole volume of human nature by the hand of the divinity itself, and can never be erased. That line may not have made it into a Broadway tune, but it's music to my ears. Hamilton's playwrights probably didn't expect it when the musical opened, but they turned that theater on 46th Street into a classroom. Unfortunately, too many students know of Alexander Hamilton because of the show, not because of their education. Only about 15% of America's students have a reasonable understanding of American history. And the numbers look just as bleak in other core subjects. The Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, ranks the United States 24th in reading, 25th in science, and 40th in math in the world. And it's not for a lack of funding. Americans spend more on education per pupil than almost every other nation on earth. And there are many who propose we spend even more on doing the same thing over and over again. Albert Einstein called this insanity. It brings to mind Mayor Bill de Blasio's renewal initiative. Yes, you heard about it earlier. One of the mayor's signature policies renewed nothing, but it did confirm that more than $750 million in centralized spending doesn't buy better results. Education spending, Milton Friedman said, will be most effective if it relies on parental choice and private initiative. The godfather of school choice was right then, and he's still right today. Students deserve something different. And actually doing something different demands courage to confront a powerful and pernicious establishment, one that opposes change in education as establishments tend to do in every other industry. And let's not kid ourselves, education is an industry. Detroit's automotive giants, for example, began as America's change agents, but they soon began protecting what is at the expense of what could be. Meanwhile, foreign automakers started doing everything Motown was doing, only better, faster, and cheaper. The big three stuck their fingers in their ears as the deafening roar of foreign competition raced toward them. Instead of going head-to-head with their competitors, Detroit's automakers ran to Washington's lawmakers to fix their problems. Look where that got them and us. Similarly, a cabal has rooted itself between students and their education to protect what is at the expense of what could be. Their fingers are in their ears too, refusing to hear the chorus of voices demanding better. Instead of pursuing innovations for students, they pursue protections from politicians for themselves. It's a precarious paradox Alexander Hamilton and others warned us about. The Federalist Papers, to which Hamilton contributed a great deal, cautioned against a tyranny of factions. These groups of agitators jealously protect and advance their own self-interest to the detriment of just about everyone else. Sound familiar? Education unions, the association of this and the organization of that, those are today's factions. One of their own, the late Al Shanker, said this: "I don't see a voice for students in the bargaining process. I think it's one of the facts of life. The consumer basically is left out." That union boss admitted then what is still true today. Factions keep student voices out, but it's way past time to let them in. Like those of the nearly 50,000 on charter schools wait lists here in New York City alone, and millions more who say they would choose a different school if they had the opportunity, we must listen to and do better for all students. So how do we solve this problem? Well, the solution is old as America herself: freedom. Freedom from government, freedom for teachers, and freedom for students. First, freedom from government. It's useful to recall Congress's commitment when it created the U.S. Department of Education 40 years ago. Then, lawmakers vowed that the move would, quote, not increase the authority of the federal government over education, nor diminish the responsibility for education, which is reserved to the states, end quote. That's the law, and I take it seriously. So we are breaking the stranglehold Washington has had on America's students, teachers, and schools, starting with all the social engineering from the previous administration. Title IX, borrower defense to repayment, gainful employment, accreditation, school discipline, ESSA mandates, Common Core, just to name a few. We are fixing each of these staggering overreaches. And perhaps what we have not done is just as important. We have not imposed new regulations or new requirements not rooted in law. We are not meddling in matters properly left to communities, to teachers, and to families. And let's talk about teachers a moment. We know a great one can breathe life into any subject. She can bring her students wing to wing with Orville Wright, take them on a trip to a palace in Versailles or a stuffy room in Philadelphia in the sweltering summer of 1787. He can turn a book into an experience, a hero of the past into a role model for today, and a lecture into a lesson that stays with his students for life. America has those teachers, many of them, but the system doesn't treat them like the professionals they are. The system's survival depends on extraordinary teachers to be treated no differently than ordinary ones. Great teachers challenge the way things have always been done, which tends to embarrass those who don't. They're given no option, no incentive but to do basically the same thing. So too many teachers simply move from year to year, rung to rung, up their step-scale compensation ladder. Is it any surprise then when great teachers leave the classroom? Every teacher should be trusted with more autonomy, freed with more flexibility, and honored as professionals who know their students and what each of them needs to learn and succeed. And our first educators, parents, must be free as well. Parents hold what Hamilton referred to as a natural liberty to decide the best environment for their children's learning. I have 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and they are each beautifully unique individuals. They learn differently, and they each need different things to challenge them. I suspect the same is true for every one of your children or grandchildren, and we should embrace that. But the education cabal says that all of our kids must learn as assigned, in the same way, in the same place, at the same time, as if they are all the same. Well, that is absolutely wrong. A recent study from professors at Stanford and Harvard confirms that 50 years of spending more money on the system, including over $1 trillion from federal taxpayers, has not improved student achievement at all, especially for the most vulnerable among us. American education remains a monopoly controlled by factions. That's why our Education Freedom Scholarships proposal is important. I hope you've seen the plan we recently announced and that Roger mentioned that was recently introduced as legislation. It's a federal tax credit, which will not create a new federal program or grow the federal government in any way. It will instead fuel state-led efforts to develop more opportunities for their own students. And students will do better because they will be empowered to pursue the education that excites and engages them. America's forgotten children will finally have opportunities that the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected already have today. How? Freedom. When we get a taste of it, we want more. and free people cannot be stopped. Look what happened when Americans exercised their freedom to buy foreign automobiles. It forced American car makers to a reckoning. 40th in math should be America's education reckoning. Germany had its own in 2000. When the world's 15-year-olds took the first PISA exam, many in Deutschland expected the results to confirm what they believed. German education was, of course, the best in the world. Well, in what's become known as the PISA shock, Germany actually ranked near the bottom in all subjects. It was a wake-up call. Germans expanded options for students and teachers and extended flexibility and autonomy to local schools. Apparently, it's paid off. In the most recent assessment, with even more countries participating, Germany placed 11th in reading and 16th in math and science. Meanwhile, we, America, has slid further down into the middle of the pack. Middle and average are not words I'm content with describing America. And I know you aren't either. We had best not cede our leadership role to other countries, especially those who don't share our values, or worse, to those who wish us harm. However you quantify leadership, whether by the economy, by defense, or by any other measure, it all starts fundamentally with education. American education must lead the world because America must lead the world. America is still the beacon of hope for freedom-loving people. And more freedom at home means Lady Liberty's torch shines even brighter abroad. Freedom requires constant vigilance to defend. So I am inspired by many of you who've dedicated your careers to the cause of freedom at home and around the world. I will continue to fight for freedom. Freedom from government, freedom for teachers, and freedom for each one of America's students. I know I can count on the Manhattan Institute to do the same. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be here. In thinking about our honoree this evening, I'm reminded of a favorite quote. There are no great men. There are only ordinary men who, in response to great challenges, to extraordinary challenges, do great things. Larry Moon, an ordinary man, did great things for this city we all love in a time of extraordinary challenges. And it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce you to the retiring president of the Manhattan Institute, Larry Moon, a good friend, professional colleague, and mentor, who tonight will receive the Institute's highest honor, the Alexander Hamilton Award, which I was the proud recipient of in 2017. For more than half its existence, Larry has been the leader of MI, which he first joined in 1982, 5 years after its founding, rising to the presidency in 1995. I first met him in the early 90s, when introduced to him by George Kelling, also a recipient of this award. George could not be here with us tonight. He is battling terminal cancer, but he asked that I convey the following. During the early days, 1988, 1989, when I, a Midwesterner, not terribly familiar with NYC, was first proposing ideas about how to address problems in the subways, it was a lonely time. Larry and MI adopted me. He grasped what I, George Kelling, was saying, that the problem was not what it seemed to be, homelessness, but was in fact disorderly behavior. Larry was always more interested in a person's ideas than their political ideology. A 1997 New York Times article about MI, turning influence into intellect, the motto of the Manhattan Institute, described MI as a think tank that has pulled off the improbable feat of helping change the course of the country's most liberal city. The course correction that Larry helped to initiate and lead was profound, taking a city that was mired in malaise and depression, as vividly illustrated in Fred Siegel's book, The Future Once Happened Here. Fred referenced a comment in 1989 by then Governor Mario Cuomo, who was responding to a question about the surging crime and disorder of the 1980s. The response was something to the effect, maybe this is as good as it gets. 2,243 murders, 5,000 people shot in the streets of New York, over 500,000 New Yorkers victims of rape, robbery, auto theft. That was not as good as it could get. But that was the city that greeted me when Kelling recruited me from Boston to tackle crime and disorder in the city's subways. Coincidentally, that was the year that MI found its bully pulpit when it launched the City Journal with its incredible staff and contributors. Working with the 4 pillars of the Institute, its research, the journal, its publications, and its conferences, Larry created the legacy we honor tonight. One that created policies to take advantage of. Policies to take advantages of the opportunities that focused on the importance of public safety, welfare to work, and charter schools, to name but a few. Paul Singer, chairman of MI, does a wonderful job summing up Larry's career and leadership contributions. He writes, under his quarter century of steady and inspired leadership, MI has grown to take its place among the very highest tier of institutions shaping American thought, discourse, and public policy. The Wall Street Journal rightly credits Larry with having helped improve the lives of millions of New Yorkers and helped restore our city to a place where anyone willing to work hard and take risks could climb the ladder of upward mobility. I'm an example of that. Larry's leadership style can probably be best summed up in his own words. He said, I feel sometimes like the manager of an opera house. There are all of these intellectual stars and divas around me. It's my job to give them room to be creative. It's all about the music. Let me now introduce the music man himself, our maestro, Larry Moen.
Thank you, Bill. You've been a good ally and a good friend. For 19 straight years, I've stood on this stage to welcome you to this magnificent event, and after the festivities ended, to say goodnight. From one angle, very little has changed. Sometimes the stage is here, sometimes it's over there, but we're always in this room. On the other hand, year over year, the crowds have gotten larger, and the support you contribute has grown dramatically. And with it, the Manhattan Institute has been able to greatly expand the work that we do. Never in the course of those 19 years, or in the course of my 24 years as president of the Institute, or of my 36 years working at the Institute, did I imagine that I would stand here today not as a master of ceremonies, but as an honoree. I can't tell you how deeply I am moved by this honor. No one knows better than I how important it is that this evening stay on schedule. So I will make 3 observations, and I will keep them brief. The first is this: all of us should be immensely proud. The man who hired me in 1981, my predecessor, Bill Hammett, always insisted on quality over quantity. The Manhattan Institute has never been, and is never going to be, the biggest think tank or the one that tries to cover everything. Fundamentally, we're economists. That means we understand comparative advantage. We've always focused on where we can make the biggest impact, and it's worked. Pound for pound, that is relative to our size and budget, No institution has had a greater impact on public policy and public life. Think of all that we've accomplished. The Manhattan Institute first injected into the conversation the idea that cracking down on small crimes could lead to big declines in major crimes. That idea, as Bill mentioned, broken windows policing, was first put into practice here in New York and has since spread to cities across the country and around the world. It saved thousands of lives, revived countless neighborhoods and communities, and generated billions of dollars in new economic activity. It is, in my humble opinion, the greatest single public policy success of the last half century. Now, of course, we didn't do it alone. Nothing would have happened without the courage and the leadership of NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton and Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Both of them are former recipients of this award, as are the two thinkers who conceived broken windows, George Kelling and the late James Q. Wilson. Nothing could possibly make me prouder than to stand in their company. As for my second observation, the job of a think tank president is a lot like being a manager of a baseball team. It's an important role. You set the rotation, the lineup, call plays, make pitching changes and the like, but you don't go up to the plate and hit the ball. You're not the star. At the Manhattan Institute, the fellows have always been the stars. And throughout my time here, I have been most fortunate in managing nothing but all-stars. Instead of Ruth, Gehrig, Mantle, and Jeter, I've had Charles Murray, Peter Huber, Myron Magnet, and Heather McDonald. Scholars who in their own fields have higher batting averages than those Cooperstown greats do in theirs. And the talent that I've managed doesn't stop with those four. I couldn't possibly name them all tonight. Suffice to say, being president of the Manhattan Institute has been like managing the 27, 61, and 96 Yankees all at the same time. How do you lose with a team like that? You really can't. And it's not just the fellows either. Among those who have made me look good are the Institute's incredible professional staff. The fact that on a night like this you hardly notice them is testament to their skill. Week after week, month after month, year after year, they stage the best events in the city, they produce the best reports, and run everything smoothly. Finally, in taking over the Institute nearly a quarter century ago, I inherited an extraordinary board of trustees. Yes, our board is generous with financial support, but they have also been generous with their ideas. Being right here in the heart of a city with so much talent has allowed us to access to their considerable experience, intelligence, and good sense. I particularly want to thank the 5 chairmen under whom I have served and learned: Chuck Bruni, Dick Gilder, Roger Hertog, Dick Weissman, and Paul Singer. My third observation is that the work really never stops. Of course, we must win new arguments and break new ground, but that's not enough. We have to keep re-winning the old arguments, keep plowing the old ground. The experience of the last few years has made clear that backsliding is an ever-present danger. Both socialism and the measles are back. In this business, no argument is ever permanently won. No success is ever beyond the danger of being repealed. Just think of the city today. We know what good schools look like and how they work, yet we still throw money at failing ones. We know how to keep the subways safe, but lately we've been letting the miscreants back through, or worse, over the turnstiles. We've won many policy arguments, it's true, but we haven't won the political argument. When Mayor de Blasio was trying to keep Eva Moskowitz's charter schools out of city buildings, one mother went to City Hall to protest and said, "If I knew he was against charter schools, I never would have voted for him." Well said, but why didn't she know? Was that her fault or was it ours? Why is there no political movement that consistently advocates for the things that really matter? Safe streets, good schools, effective government, and conveys that message to the general public in an ongoing way. I am not suggesting for a moment that the Institute abandon its nonpartisan stance. One of our great strengths has always been that we will work with anyone to help make this city and other cities a better place. I'm saying that for our policy successes to endure, we must be part of creating a successful politics of reform. We at the Institute can and should be indispensable in providing the intellectual architecture. And that's the last time I'll ever officially be able to say we in that context. This is incredibly bittersweet. I'm proud of what we've done together. For someone who believes so strongly in the power of ideas, I'm struck by how in the end, all I can remember are the people, including the incredible people in this room. And to have played out my career on the stage of New York, the greatest city in the world, is a memory I will cherish. Now I move on, confident in the future, not just of the Institute and its leadership, especially its new president, Raihan, but of the future of this city and this country. Thank you all, and good night.